Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. We'll be chanting 7th Canto, Chapter 5, Text 11. Our theme for today and tomorrow is friends and enemies. Are they a basic material necessity of life? In other words, shouldn't we have to have friends and enemies? That's just the way it is, right? Like a coin has two sides. Similarly, life in this world involves acquiring friendships, maintaining them, destroying them, and making enemies and trying to neutralize them. That's just the way it is, right? And the more friends you can have, the better. The less enemies. But enemies are okay if you can triumph over them, right? And it's okay to have enemies. But it seems that friends and enemies are a necessity. How can you make your way through this world without some people who are friends and some who are enemies? And it could be that it's even kind of fun to have enemies, right? It gives you something to get riled up about. And then it helps you to unite more with your friends. When together with your friends, you all denounce the enemy. And then the friends can they can bond closer, right? So not only do you get a feeling of superiority by condemning the enemy, but you also increase your sense of bonding and friendship as you and your friends confirm to each other, yeah, that person's really out of it. Us against them is really empowering, isn't it? In material life. When someone wrongs you, what's the first thing you want to happen? You want someone else to support you and understand, right? You have to find at least one person, and preferably as many as possible, who are going to agree with you. That's why they're your friends. They agree with you. And often agreeing with you means agreeing on who is the common enemy. Or even though the enemy of you may not be my enemy, because I'm friends with you, therefore I should recognize that that person is the enemy. So things get very intricate. So this friends and enemies syndrome, which seems so natural in the real world, is actually a complete mental concoction. It's due to an uncontrolled mind. The mind fractures the world into friends and enemies. And friends are those who aid you in your pursuit of gratification, stability, security, fulfillment. And enemies are those who somehow or other get in the way of your plans, your ambitions, or they minimize you. How dare that happen, someone to minimize you. Or they just plain don't understand you, and that's also a crime. How dare you not understand me? That's worse than someone not appreciating your glories. Because after all, you want to feel that I'm so understandable, what's the problem? No one else has this problem. No one else, that's my friend anyway, that's why they're my friends, because they overlook all the bad things in me. And they tell me only good things. So we're going to focus on this theme tonight and tomorrow morning. And we'll do that by consulting the seventh canto, the history of Prahlad Maharaj. But surprisingly, we're not so much going to focus on Lord Nrsimhadeva slaying Hiranyakashipu. We're not going to so much focus on Prahlad Maharaj's extraordinary teachings to his schoolmates. What we are going to highlight is the whole phenomenon of Hiranyakashipu considering his own son to be an enemy. Now, it didn't always start out like that. And we'll see. It started out with just Hiranyakashipu and cohorts, considering that Prahlad had been spoiled by the enemy, and that Prahlad was kind of innocent, and the enemy had kind of infiltrated into Prahlad's school and spread strange talk about the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So at first, the problem of who is an enemy focused on the infiltrators, the agitators, who implanted Vaishnava Dharma in Prahlad, some or other. And at first, Hiranyakashipu and his educational department were quite sure they could stamp it out. Like, they thought they had the virus easily under control. But then, as you'll see, the spotlight focused on not simply the enemies who had snuck into the school and poisoned Prahlad, but the spotlight switched on Prahlad himself. You must be an enemy. Sri Parado-vacha Paraswaschet Yasadgraha Pumsamyan Mayaya Krita Vimohita Diyam Dristas Tasmai Bhagavate Namaha Paraswaschet Yasadgraha Pumsamyan Mayaya Kritaha Vimohita Diyam Dristas Tasmai Bhagavate Namaha Paraswaschet Yasadgraha Samyan Mayaya Kritaha Vimohita Diyam Dristas Tasmai Bhagavate Namaha. No one else? No other men? Chant? Sri Parada Uvacha. Prahlada Maharaj replied, Para, an enemy. Swa, a kinsman or friend. Cha, also. Iti, thus. A satgraha, material conception of life. Whom some, of persons. Yat, of whom. Maya, by the external energy. Krita, created. Vimohita, bewildered. Dhyam, of those whose intelligence. Drishta, practically experienced. Tasmai, unto him. Bhagavate, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Nama, my respectful obeisances. Prahlada Maharaj replied. He's replying to his teachers, and we'll backtrack after reading this verse. Let me offer my respectful obeisances unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead, whose external energy has created the distinctions of my friend and my enemy by diluting the intelligence of men. Indeed, I am now actually experiencing this, although I have previously heard of it from authoritative sources. Repeat after me. Prahlada Maharaj replied, let me offer my respectful obeisances unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead, whose external energy has created the distinctions of my friend and my enemy by diluting the intelligence of man. Indeed, I am now actually experiencing this, although I have previously heard of it from authoritative sources. Purport. As stated in Bhagavad Gita 5:18, Vidya Vinaya Sampanne Brahmane Gavihastane Shuni Chaiva Swapake Cha Pandita Samadarshanaha. The humble sage, by virtue of true knowledge, sees with equal vision a learned and gentle brahmana, a cow, an elephant, a dog, and a dog-eater, outcast. Pandita, those who are actually learned, the equipoised advanced devotees who have full knowledge of everything, do not see any living entity as an enemy or friend. Instead, with broader vision, they see that everyone is part of Krishna, as confirmed by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Jivera Swarup Hoy Krishna Nitya Das. Chaitanya Charitamrita. Every living entity being part of the Supreme Lord is meant to serve the Lord, just as every part of the body is meant to serve the whole body. Om Agana Timirandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Militang Yena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha. Jai Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadha Srivasadi Gaur Bhaktivinoda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama. Such a long purport, and we'll be referring to further parts of it as we speak. But let's go back to how this whole focus of friends, enemies arose. You'll find that in a question that Yudhisthira Maharaj asked Narada Muni twice in two places, at the beginning of the 7th canto, and now as we move into chapter 5 of the 7th canto, Yudhisthira Maharaj is asked the question yet twice again, one after another, at the end of the 4th chapter. So what's so astonishing that 3 times he's asking this question, and the second time he asks it, it's repetitive, 2 in a row, for a total of 3. Prahlad is so pure, so well-behaved, so gentle. And he's a great devotee. How is it that his father considered him an enemy and tried to kill him? This question astonished Yudhisthira Maharaj. And he naturally asked such a question to Narada Muni. In other words, he's recognizing, I want to have authorized knowledge. Authorized knowledge comes from an authentic person.
Right.
Yudhisthira Maharaj is not just going to ask anyone. No, although he's such an extraordinarily powerful chief executive, he knows whom to consult. He knows what to ask about. And by his questioning, Narada Muni, the dialogue is carried down through Bhagavatam. Shukadeva Goswami is relaying it to Parikshit Maharaj. Sutta Goswami is relaying it to the sages gathered at Naimisaranya. And we have the same treasure today. So Yudhisthira points out what may not be so obvious these days of the disappearance of the nuclear family. It seems very few, at least in the first world, are remembering what a mother should do, what a father should do, what children should do. It's become such a bewilderment, such a mystery. And as we often point out, here in New Zealand, you know, the Maha Mantra for training your children. Everyone knows, right? The Brahma Sutra, the codified Divya Gyan, divine knowledge. What is that? Just be happy in your own way, dear. Whatever makes you happy, we're happy with. Just be yourself, whatever that is. Doesn't get any better than that, right? But that's a symptom of the age of Kali, in which the age of darkness, in which no one knows what to do or what not to do. Everyone's winging it, you know? So Yudhishthira Maharaj is pointing out what should be obvious. Parents should be affectionate toward their children. And why would a normal parent with affection try to terminate his own son who is so gentle, so well behaved, and also an extraordinary bhakta, an extraordinary Vaishnava? All these things put together are mind-blowing. This is what Yudhishthira is more or less saying in contemporary lingo. I can't get over this. I can't process this. Can you explain, Narada Muni? We've got all these factors here. In other words, such a favorable son is rarely to be seen. And yet, his father tries to kill him. Now, Yudhishthira points out, affectionate, responsible parents do try to discipline their children. Except in New Zealand, of course. But in a normal human society, responsible parents try to discipline their children for the sake of proper upbringing, for proper training. But they don't try to kill their child who is so well behaved and obedient. So these are Yudhishthira Maharaj's questions to Narada Muni. How could a father be so violent towards such an exalted son? This is, in fact, Yudhishthira says, I've never heard of such a contradiction. It violates all norms of civilized human life, whether material or spiritual norms. So he presents his doubt to Narada Muni. He wants Narada Muni to clear up this doubt. And so this is why Narada Muni will further elaborate upon the history of Prahlad. Now, Hiranyakashipu was responsible in one way toward his son. How is that? He wanted his son educated. Some of you have had parents or a parent who really pushed you to educate yourself properly, to actually study when you went to school. Hiranyakashipu wanted to give his son a quality education as he saw it. So the family priest was Shukracharya, who had two sons, Sunda and Amarka. And Shukracharya was expert in karmic activity, good karma for the sake of getting a comfortable birth in the next life. Shukracharya didn't teach anything transcendental. Even though he's just teaching good karma, yajnas, sacrifices for material elevation, he shouldn't have done it for Hiranyakashipu, whose family was totally atheistic. So that was a fall down for Shukracharya, even from the material point of view. But what was Shukracharya interested in? He was interested in religion for material remuneration. My sons, they can teach at the school. So I'll get money by doing yajnas for Hiranyakashipu, and I'll get money by my sons teaching in the Asura Kula, the school for demoniac children. I'll have multiple revenue streams. So he's thinking like a typical person today. I've often pointed out, maybe Dhvamrita can tell us. Last time I checked, which was some years ago, the motto of the New Zealand Ministry of Education was, the purpose of education is economic advancement. It's still that? Equitable outcomes. They've changed the wording slightly. Equitable outcomes means it's got to add up as dollars and cents. Financial equity. So they tried to tone it down a bit, huh?
I think they also are trying to use the word equity in terms of broadening the groups of people in which they're trying to serve, trying to be equitable in serving all different kinds of people across New Zealand, making sure they're all
equitable, oh, making sure everyone's getting the money. Oh, I get it now. So the purpose of education has now become refined in New Zealand. Instead of just raw economic development, is now equitable development, that everyone gets the money. Not just a few like the USA. Everyone can be a good materialist. Equitable materialism. Honor among thieves. You know the example about honor amongst thieves. The burglars break into some house and clean it out, take all the stuff to their hideout, and then the burglars say amongst themselves, okay, let's make sure we divide it all fairly. We're honest persons. Let's be equitable among ourselves. That is material existence. So Shukra Acharya, his very title, as you may remember from the 8th canto, his name lets you know what he thinks is most important. Shukra, Semina. Those in my seminal line, those who are in my reproductive line, I look out for them. That's my main interest. My family line, which is not spiritual, but biological. My children, I want to make sure that they are successful. I succeed through my children. So that notion was held so dearly by Shukracharya that he even became under the employ, a hired hand, a hired priest for Hiranyakashipu. He should have known better, but money is the honey. And he could always justify himself. It's not just the prosperity for me, it's for my boys. And then my boys will have children, and for their children, and on it goes. And this way, that's what life is all about. Narada Muni's got a lot of explaining to do. How Prahlad's bhakti was causing hatred. How could bhakti be the source of hatred in someone? So as you know, Prahlad's father sent him to school. Although Prahlad is already educated in bhakti. How? While he was in the womb of his mother, Narada Muni instructed him. That means Narada Muni also instructed the mother. But this particular mother was so focused on her anxieties. And it was a tough situation for her. Her husband, Hiranyakashipu, was away from home. The demigods had captured the mother. But Narada Muni had taken her to his ashram, so she was safe. But still, When the mind is overwhelmed by anxiety, whether you're a man or a woman, it's hard for you to concentrate. And so even though Narada Muni was speaking to her and the unborn child in her womb, what happened? What was the result? She couldn't remember anything. And Prahlada within the womb heard everything and remembered. So this shows you that actually there is no material impediment to spiritual advancement. Somehow or other, the show goes on. Prahlada's in the womb, yet he can retain, he can hear and retain. Whereas the mother, due to her anxieties, material anxieties, she couldn't focus. So Prahlada was already educated, but obviously his father and his teachers didn't know that. So the teachers accepted Prahlada in their school. They enrolled him along with other sons of demoniac fathers. And they proceeded with their curriculum, which was all about politics and economics, what people are so interested in today. Prahlada couldn't relish these subject matters. In fact, he was turned off by such talks because he knew politics and economics becomes a device for dividing the world into friends and enemies. This one's my friend, that one's my enemy. This group are my friends, that group are my enemies. This nation is allied with us, that nation is against us. And it's always shifting. You know from your own experiences. I've heard it from quite a few of you. Someone, you had a partner, and then some other, your own friend scooped up the partner, or you scooped up your friend's partner. Just consider, that's life, tough cookies. That's what friends are for. It's a battle, and everyone should understand that. And you look at international relations. Countries that fought on the same side in World War I, 20 years later became enemies in World War II. Countries that were allied in World War II, immediately after the war become enemies. This is madness. Yet people take that as normal. Who is our nation allied with? The alliances change, the in-groups become the out-groups become the in-groups. All based on material expediency, material reasons of money, power, geopolitical positioning. This just goes on and on, back and forth, up, down, and all around. And the international scene reflects the scene that goes on amongst individuals. You can see your whole life like international relations, international diplomacy. You've got to have friends that are allied with you and who see things your way. Otherwise, you feel bleak and empty, right? If you don't have any friends who see things your way. Your friends, they should understand you and support you. When you've been wronged, you seek out those who will relate to your situation. Let me tell you what happened to me. Oh, yeah, what happened? Oh, thank you for listening. You're my friend. And you expect your friends to line up with you in battle, right? if they don't actively join your attack and defense, they should at least give you moral support, emotional support. Yeah, you're right to be angry. Yeah, okay. You expect your friends to accept your vision of a situation. If they don't, how can they be your friend? No, you're wrong. What kind of friend are you? Tell me what I want to hear. That's why you're my friend. Well, you're wrong. You got it all wrong. Huh? And then what do you do next? You seek out another friend and complain. I thought so-and-so was my friend. They don't understand me. I just realized. And you hope that the third person will rally to your side. Yeah, I guess he or she just didn't get it, you know? Oh, thank you for saying that. So this happens on an individual level. It happens on a family level. It happens on a societal level. It happens on an international level. If you can be sure, if human beings today were capable of perceiving life on other planets, they would start fights and quarrels with the people of other planets. You can be sure of that. It's actually their good fortune that they don't perceive life on any other planets, because otherwise they just expand their quarrels onto an interplanetary scale. So what I would like you to consider tonight is how essential friends and enemies has become for us, the distinction. How the mind does that. And we should wonder, is there a life possible without such material distinction? We'll find out more and more how a bhakta, a devotee, especially one as exalted as Prahlad, doesn't actually have friends or enemies. He or she sees everyone as a servant of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And he or she wants to be around those who recognize their servitorship and serve in a favorable way to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And for the rest who don't realize that, show mercy to them, show compassion to them. But if they're envious like a snake, then you avoid them. Prahlad's father is going to display the behavior of an envious snake. Snakes kill people for no reason other than you stepped on me or you came 5 meters away from me. That's a snake. You have no snakes in New Zealand, right? I guess that's because the people are all non-envious. I've seen envious snakes before, cobras. You can just see they're concentrated envy. They look at you, just, what the hell are you doing in my world? Anyone else seen a cobra or something? No one else? Where? In a basket in the How many rupees did you pay? 10 rupees? A snake in a basket. But how many of you seen a deadly snake in the wild? Where? Huh? Did it chase you? Yeah, the same thing happened to me. Was it a cobra? Yeah, I've seen a cobra cross. I was walking up a path and in the Philippines, and a cobra came out of the grasslands that the path was cutting through, and the cobra was crossing the path. I just immediately said, Hare Krishna. And the cobra just looked at me, such a concentrated evil vision, and just stuck out a long tongue. If I want to, I can kill you right now. Because I had took off running down the path, but they move really fast. Fortunately, they didn't chase me. They hold their head up high and they can move. They can travel quite quickly. So I just saw this like concentrated form of envy. How dare you exist in my world? I am a cobra. So you'll see Prahlad's father demonstrating that kind of mentality. So again, Prahlad received his education as his teachers saw it: divide and conquer, politics, economics, how to exploit for your own profit. Prahlad had another kind of education, though, by the grace of Narada Muni. He saw every living being as Krishna's part. As Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, Mamaivam Sho Jiva Loke Jiva Bhuta Sanatana. All living entities are my eternal fragmented parts. So a devotee sees, number one, that all living entities are part of Krishna, and number two, the devotee sees all living entities as servants of Krishna. He sees the oneness in terms of everyone is the servant and Krishna is the only master. So Prahlad had to endure this kind of education, but you know what was happening when there was break time. Prahlad would gather his schoolmates and give them his education. While all that's going on, his father wants to show affection as the father understood it. Just like a materialistic parent of today, I want to see, I want to hear how my child is advancing in material knowledge, advancing in material ambition. Prahlad, please, sit on my lap. Let me affectionately inquire from you. Tell me, you know that famous question, tell me what's the best thing you've learned in school today? I've sent you to such an elitist, prestigious institution run by Sunda Numarka, the finest demoniac teachers in existence. You're getting such an advanced education, Prahlad. So tell me what you think the best thing is that you've studied from these great teachers. And as you know, Hiranyakashipu never expected any reply that was complex. He expected to hear some childish statements. And of course, Prahlad's reply was unforgettable and is still unforgettable. Tat sadhu manyaya suyavarya dehinam sada samadvigya dhyama sadgraha hittatma papam griham andakupam. Vano Gatovya Dharmashrita. The best thing I've learned in school is that anyone who thinks they are the body must always be in anxiety. They've plunged into a dry well thinking there's water there. The best thing they can do is reject such a situation. Leave such a lifestyle behind. So what was Hiranyakashipu's reaction? He was amused. He didn't, at this point, consider that Prahlad is an enemy. He considered the enemy has spoiled my boy's intelligence. He didn't take Prahlad's saying this seriously as indicative of Prahlad being an enemy at this point. He took it that the security in the school has been lax. My boy is innocent. He's mindlessly repeating crazy stuff. What is this talk about? Anyone who thinks that a body must be full of anxiety. What's this talk about diving into a dry well, thinking there's water? What's this talk about renouncing such a life? So being an expert manager, an expert administrator, what did Hiranyakashipu do next? He told Prahlad's teachers, be careful, enemies have snuck into the school, spoiling the children. Double down on your educational efforts. Keep a watch on these boys more. So, here you see the beginning of Hiranyakashipu's downfall regarding the torture of his son. He hadn't at this point considered Prahlad to be the enemy, but he considered that the camp of the enemies had somehow or other infiltrated information into his naive son. So he's still thinking good about his son, you know? It's not my son's fault. He's been under the influence of these sentimental Vaishnavas who don't understand how to live life. So I've got to double down on his education, make sure that he's trained properly. And so he told the teachers, Sundaramarka, you be more careful, be more thorough in your educational efforts. As Narada Muni relays it, Hiranyakashipu, when he heard Prahlad's words, he was laughing. This child's intelligence has been spoiled by words of the enemy. Again, not my child is the enemy, but the enemy has snuck some nonsense into my child's mind. Still my child. Still there's affection, and so Hiranyakashipu was laughing. Fortunately, in other words, fortunately, it's a problem I can easily deal with. We'll stamp out this virus in the school immediately. So again and again, the concept of on the side of the enemy comes up. Not in regards to Prahlad, but in regards to what Prahlad was talking about. So although Prahlad is not fingered as the enemy yet, you see the whole concept of the enemy coming more and more center stage. And then soon you're going to see the spotlight's going to shift from the enemy camp that had infiltrated the school to Prahlada himself. But first, the teachers are going to try to more thoroughly educate Prahlada. They took that task very seriously. And they were concerned about their income. They were concerned about their career. They thought, not only will we more thoroughly educate Prahlada, but we'll also try to find out the identities of the enemy who have snuck into the school. In order to do that, they treated Prahlada very sweetly, because they figured if we heavy him out, he won't tell us the names of the deviants, the enemy. So we'll treat him nicely. We'll even give him some sweets, and he'll spill the beans. And they also hoped that by treating Prahlada sweetly, he would get the message in a nice way that he should not listen to the poisoners anymore. So they had a two-pronged approach. We want the names, and we want to give Prahlada the message that he should not listen to such persons. So we'll be very sweet with him because we don't want to antagonize him. That won't accomplish our purposes. So it's Narada Muni describes. They spoke with very mild voices and affectionate words. They even praised him. But actually they were eager for information about the enemy. Where are they? Who are they? So they said, Vatsa Parada Bhadram Te. Our dear son, Prahlada. They were his teachers, so they considered him like a son. Our dear son, Prahlada. All benedictions to you, all goodness, all auspiciousness to you. Now, tell us what's going on. They spoke with good logic, all peace and good fortune unto you. Kindly do not speak lies, just reply with the truth. You see, these other boys at school, they're not like you. They don't speak such deviant things. Now, tell us, how did you learn such instructions? How has your intelligence been spoiled in this way? They felt that their main duty was to find out who are the enemy. So again and again, you're seeing this whole point, the enemy, the enemy. And the reward that you get if you expose the enemy. We should take this in a personal way. I think many of us, when we hear this famous history of Prahlada and Hiranyakashipu, we don't realize that in a more subtle way, we can do the same thing, dividing the world into friends and enemies. But because it's just little us, we do it in such a, we think we're innocent. After all, it's just little old me. All right, I've got some persons I consider friends, some I consider enemies, but it's like everyone, It's just the way it is. But Hiranyakashipu, Sandana, Marka, Shukracharya, that's way over the top. But me and my Maya, well. If you're going to be a man in this world, you have to have some enemies. Or if you're going to be a woman in this world who achieves things, got to have some enemies. In fact, having enemies is a sign that you're progressive and ambitious and climbing the ladder. So we shrug it off, right? You expect, well, that person just doesn't like me. Tough. But my friends all know that person's got it wrong. And you feel good about yourself because your friends support you, right? Yeah. The men and the women do it in their own way. You want to feel bolstered. You want to feel propped up by your friends as you make the distinctions. That person's the enemy. Do you all understand? And you would hope that your enemies also become the enemies of your friends, right? That makes the friendship bond really tight. So you see this same phenomenon sociologically in the world in terms of clashes between different groups, however they define their group, by religion, ethnicity, tribe, birth characteristics. 5 things I often speak about: class, color, country, creed, culture. You divide the world in that way, although those 5 things shift all the time. And so the psychology, the social psychology, is that you get bolstered, you get propped up, you get energized in 2 ways. One, it feels so good to have someone to look down on, doesn't it? The more you can dehumanize the enemy, the better it is. In fact, research has shown that the easiest way to commit atrocities and genocide is if you dehumanize the enemy. If you don't consider them human beings. In fact, the first thing you should do is give them a number, not a name. And then it's so easy to just annihilate them because they don't exist as human beings. Studies have shown that tribes in the forest or in the jungle who paint their faces so they can't be recognized can be the most fierce in terms of atrocities because their identity is not known. And amongst so-called civilized human beings, they have other ways of protecting their identity and denying the human identity to the other persons that they're attacking. So you get a sense of upliftment. We're stamping out the enemy. But not only that, but amongst your own group, you bond tightly. We're all against them, right? Yeah, we're all together against them. So you get a lift both ways, you get energized both ways by feeling superior to the enemy and by feeling a closer bond with your friends as you denigrate, as you condemn the enemy. You like that because you feel it brings your group closer together. And people do this about so many things. Just like we have Shivananda saying, he plays the upright bass so nicely. But he wants to get into the typical friends and enemies distinction. He starts a whole movement, down with electric basses. They've ruined music. So he gets together all the upright bass players and The ones who play the electric bass are just so inauthentic. They don't have sufficient sensitivity. There's probably something wrong with their fingers. They can't actually hear the subtleties. Krishna Prasad's already turning red. It's like blasphemy. But this is how easy it is to cause dualities and cause dissension, and that's it. It's that easy. You can just see it happening, right? And then Shivananda Sain's fellow upright bass player friends say, let's get together and start an organization. The next minute they'll be having a protest march. Rid Wellington of electric bass players. Of course, New Zealand is inclusive about everything, so you can't really do that. So instead you can't rid the world or rid the country of electric bass players, but you talk about them. You talk down on, you condemn them verbally. And what about if one of your friends in the upright bass player group defects to the electric bass player group? This is how materialistic living goes on. And dissension happens so easily because the so-called unity is on the material plane. You can't get peace on the material plane. But people think it's going to happen. Because the material plane is illusion, how are you going to have real peace? Other than you'll get a glimpse, a hope for peace. That's all. This is why you see families ripped apart, nations ripped apart, the world ripped apart, in spite of everyone wanting peace, peace, peace. I've told the story before. When I was doing a home program in Sydney, Australia, a typical story. It happens everywhere, but I just happened to hear it directly. One young man told me this. He was a married man. He was in his 20s. Everything was going fine. He had his brother living with him. And one night he woke up around 1 a.m. and noticed his wife was not there. And so he just, what happened? So he got up and opened the door to the room and went out in the hallway. And at that moment, he saw his wife coming out of his brother's room. And of course, what was the first thing she said? It's not what you think. 1 a.m. in the morning. And so, of course, this was a disaster in which he lost everything. He lost his wife, he lost his brother, and his mother sided with his brother, so he lost his mother too. You obviously weren't giving her emotional support. You can't blame her. Let her be with my other son. He lost everything. His wife, his brother, his mother. These things happen. Similarly, amongst nations, 1 minute they're attacking one another, the next minute they decide to become allies against someone else who's the enemy. This is world history. This is World War I, World War II, and on and on and on. It still goes on today. Millions of people have died because of an alliance between one country and another. And because one country was attacked, even though the attack wasn't on the other country was allied with the country that was attacked. So millions of people have died. So what Prahlada is teaching us is very important here. So the teacher is asking, has this pollution of your intelligence been brought about by you or by the enemies? We're very eager to hear about this. Please tell us. In other words, give us the names and we'll arrange that these infiltrators are dragged before Hiranyakashipu and killed. So what's Prahlada's response to all this? The verse we chanted today. Tasmai Bhagavate Namaha. I'm offering my respectful obeisances unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who has an external energy, Maya, that artificially creates this whole friends and enemies scene. It does that by diluting the intelligence of the conditioned souls. And Prahlad says, I've heard all about this previously from authorities, and now I am experiencing it. This is a real bhakta, demonstrating to us how to live an authorized life. I heard about it from authorities, I'm experiencing it. Just like Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita to Arjuna, Maya Sakta Manaparta Yogam Yunjan Manashraya. Asamshayam Shamaram Mam Yatha Yasasi Tatstrinu. Listen, Arjuna. I am going to teach you. You'll hear and then you'll experience. How clear our bhakti life can be if we act in that way. Hear and then apply what you hear. So Prahlad is cross-referencing what's happening around him. I've heard about this, and now I'm actually experiencing it. This is civilized life. So as we read in part of the purport, someone who's actually intelligent sees all living entities as Krishna's parts. And in this purport, Srila Prabhupada gives us very wonderful lifestyle information, which I've always cherished. He writes, a Vaishnava sees other servants to be so advanced that he has much to learn from them. This is what makes bhakti life so interesting. So much to learn from each devotee. So rather than see devotees as sometimes carriers of inconvenience, sometimes bothersome, instead, if you consider that each devotee has something to teach you and study them. If you would have that attitude, you would see a great shift in your spiritual life. Whether they're junior to you, or apparently equal to you, or senior to you, study them and see what there's something you can learn. That's why I always like to hear stories about histories about devotees, how they came to bhakti, how they handled various situations. You can learn. And you can only learn if you consider that the person's life has value. Indeed, as Prabhupada writes here, seeing other servants to be so advanced that you understand, I've got so much to learn from this person. Just that concept alone can revolutionize your association with devotees. And the purport also goes through much effort to teach us what is real oneness. We read, according to the Vaishnava philosophy, the master is one and the servants are also one, but the distinction between the master and servant must continue even in the liberated stage. In the conditioned stage, we think that some living beings are our friends, whereas others are enemies, and thus we are in duality. In the liberated stage, however, the conception is that God is the master and that all living entities, being servants of God, are one. So we're not one in the sense of there's no individuality. We are one in the sense of being servants of the Supreme One. And we are qualitatively equal with that Supreme One, yet quantitatively different. So we are one in terms of servants of the one master, parts of the complete whole. Just like you would consider, it's getting harder and harder to give this example, but a normal family unit. The family is, you're correct to say the family is one in the old time traditional sense. Yes, the family is one, meaning they're one in interest. They're working together. Just like the traditional family businesses in India. The father would leave the business to the sons, and the eldest son would be the chief, and they would all work cooperatively, living together in a joint family. Any of your relatives do that, Vanamali, Gopal? Live as a joint family? Used to, right, yes. Those were the days. So many big businesses in India, big and small, had that joint family system. The brothers would run the business cooperatively. The older brother would be the final say, but it's all changing. Just like when you go to Lowy Bazaar in Vrindavan to buy your devotional cloth and deity paraphernalia, those businesses were all joint family businesses. But when the father passed away, the unity couldn't last long in this age of quarrel, and so all the businesses are divided up. What's the name of that biggest, well, it seems to be the biggest publisher in India? I can't remember. Huge publisher. It was a joint family enterprise. It's split now into 7 publishing houses. Munshiram, something like that. If we say the family is one, people can understand that. Although it's a distant memory, especially here in New Zealand. One of my godbrothers in Australia was telling me, he's not originally from Australia, but he was noticing, he said, Western devotees here never talk about their family. I said, well, try New Zealand. But anyway, you still appreciate the example that the family is one, although there are individuals. Similarly, we are all one with Krishna as members of Krishna's family. Still, there is the Supreme One and the parts. We'll continue tomorrow with a discussion of Prahlad handling an intensified friends and enemy scene, because now the spotlight's going to turn on him as the enemy. And things are going to become so intense that that famous situation comes about in which his father wants to kill him, considering his affectionate, ideal son to be enemy number one. This prayer, in conclusion, this prayer that we chanted by Prahlad Maharaj is very appropriate. You can always remember that when you find yourself feeling antagonized by someone. You know they've wronged you. You say like Prahlad Maharaj has said, let me offer my respectful obeisances unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead, whose external energy has created this mentality in me and in the other person. This external energy has diluted our intelligence. I've heard about this before, and now I'm experiencing the power of my own mind. This is what my mind does. It's hard work as devotees, making sure you don't create enemies, because especially in the social atmosphere of today, filled with such strife and anxiety, trauma, abuse, it's natural, it seems, to want to strike out, strike back. Sometimes devotees are rough in their treatment or immature in their treatment, and you want to hold on to that. And it's an austerity, actually, to conduct yourself in such a way that you don't make these distinctions of friend and enemy amongst devotees. And sometimes you really have to bite your tongue. You've got to really show some tolerance. And we hate showing tolerance, don't we? Tolerance? Everything in us and the way we've been trained tells us that you don't tolerate anything. In fact, it's psychologically unhealthy, right? What is Krishna talking about? Thumbs the dictions from bars to Arjuna, just tolerate. Well, this is just, we recite the verse, but we know it's unhealthy, right? You've got to have people on your side and people you're against, and then life is complete. So as devotees, it does take an effort by all of us, me, you, everyone, to refrain from pressing the nuclear button. It's hard work. I agree, it's not easy sometimes. But if you do that, if you exercise that restraint, you'll notice that Krishna blesses you. And furthermore, in time, whatever disagreement you saw, it becomes minimized in mystically. And you start to see the other person's point of view also in time. Well, yeah, I could see how someone would respond that way. I still don't think it's right, of course, but at least I can see that it has some humanity to it. You start to concede something. But you never do that without tolerance. Because the first tendency is to go for your guns. You are now an enemy. And these days, right, it could be your own spouse, a lifelong acquaintance. Doesn't matter. Person living in the same country, person part of the same tribe, same religion, same ethnic group, doesn't matter. So I'm speaking this history of Prahlad, which most of you know, but I wanted to highlight this part that maybe you didn't think of so deeply, the whole friends and enemies syndrome that Prahlad had to cope with. Remember, number one, he's accused of being influenced by the enemy. Now, number two, we're going to see tomorrow morning, he is the enemy and must die at the hands of his own father. So this is why Yudhishthira Maharaj is astonished. And he asks the question 3 times in the 7th canto to Narada Muni, what's going on here? Such an ideal character, person, Prahlad, whatever, a dream child, a child every parent would want. Yet the father wants to kill him. What's happened here? Surely parents correct their children out of affection and wanting to give good training. But look what this father is doing. I've never heard of anything like this before. And similarly, in the world's history, you've seen millions of people slaughtered because they are the enemy, and then 10 years later they become a friendly nation. You can only consider this to be the work of the illusory energy. So this happens, as I said, on an international level, and it happens on an individual level. So we have to be careful, and it takes, I admit, it takes a lot of effort. It's austere. We don't like austerity, nor do we like tolerance. It requires some austerity and tolerance to avoid this in the society of devotees. It's part of controlling the mind. And we'll hear more tomorrow about how this whole friends and enemies thing is created by a material mind. All right, questions? Yes.
My question is about offenses to devotees. So the tendency to commit offenses is very prominent in the political consciousness of the Christian soul. And it seems to be that it's a bit cruel that Krishna gives such heavy punishments for offenses, or unfair at least.
He's saying that if one has a nature of, or a tendency to constantly make offenses, it seems cruel that Krishna gives such heavy penalties for offenses to devotees. Because after all, we're duty bound to be constantly offensive. We've got to be like that. No, you don't have to be like that. That's why we educate ourselves to be mindful of offenses. And being mindful, being sensitive, means we care. And we apologize quickly. And as we mature in bhakti, we're quick to blame ourselves. Not in some kind of psychological abusive way, but we know that even the situation looks like, in all high probability, that someone did something to me, some or other I was not Krishna conscious enough to influence the situation properly. Some or other I am at fault. This is hard for a materialist to understand. Very difficult. Because the tendency in material life is that as soon as someone's wronged you, you immediately go on the attack. If you live in the USA and you've got money, the first thing you do is go hire a lawyer. Sue the person. Someone just looks at you the wrong way and you sue them. So far, it's not like that in New Zealand, although I hear it's starting to happen, but nowhere to the extreme of life in the USA. But we have that mentality. We don't sue people in court in this country so readily, but with our mind, we sue them. So to keep that kind of behavior minimized in this society of devotees is hard work, I admit. I seek to practice what I say, and I'll tell you, it's austere sometimes. But we're thinking, what is best for Krishna's pleasure? And what is best for our spiritual development? We don't want to be trapped into that whole duality of friends and enemies. Do you know what that devotee did to me? Are you with me against that person? I don't want to be trapped in that. But I admit it can be hard work at times. That's why we all need uplifting association that keeps us from falling into that syndrome. It's one of the main tricks of the illusory energy to make devotees ineffective in their impact. Start wars amongst devotees. After all, this is the age of quarrel. And you have to expect that such influences will rock devotees. Doesn't have to touch devotees, but it will rock the boat, so to speak, that we're in. And so it does take some effort, especially these days, at this point in the world's history. Current events. There is so much strife, so much agitation in the atmosphere. All over the world like that. Don't think New Zealand will be forever immune to that. It's not immune to the age of Kali. It's not immune to the modes of material nature. Oh, people are so stirred up about so many hostilities. And it's affecting our devotees. It's rattling their brains, and you see even devotees become very on edge toward each other just because of the way the atmosphere is. It's a time that requires more spiritual depth. We have to put effort into deepening our spiritual quality and not become so dissipated by the external events, which are becoming more and more crazy. You've got climate change kicking in. You've got economic instability kicking in. You've got the pandemic. And as I always point out, you've got thousands of nuclear weapons that still exist. So New Zealand's not exempt from any of those, from effect by any of those things. First world countries are giving out magic money to take people through the pandemic economic crisis, but what happens when they stop printing the magic money? You're not going to see magic behavior. So all this turbulence affects our devotees. People throughout the world are suffering under crazy leaders. Now the three biggest world leaders, whatever your political views are, that's not the point, but in Brazil, in the USA, in the UK, all three of those who said, this COVID thing is a silly, they all have COVID now. I'm sorry for them, but they told so many people, millions of people, don't take it seriously. No need to wear a mask. It's all just like having a cold, you know. People are suffering more, and they'll suffer more in the future. Next year seems to be a very tumultuous year as the money runs out, the magic money runs out. Don't expect overnight a vaccine is going to appear and everyone's going to get inoculated overnight. It's not going to happen like that. It's hard for us as Bhakti yogis to understand why people freak out so much about being locked down for a while. We're not going into the conspiracy theories, pro and con about it. We're just talking about the psychological reaction. People can't handle just being quiet for a couple of weeks. That's what I'm talking about, not the politics and what are the real motivations, and that's what I'm not talking about. But I'm talking about a person's psychological reaction to just chilling out for a few weeks. You understand? That's what I'm referring to. I just can't handle it. For devotees, it's like, wow, I can read, I can chant. And just like here in New Zealand, you know, if you're coming from overseas, you have to go into these hotels for 2 weeks of quarantine. People can't handle that. Last week, what happened? Someone was on the 4th floor in the hotel and tied bed sheets together, knotted them, and went out the window. Because they couldn't handle, you know, just being quiet for 2 weeks. Can you imagine that? Getting bed sheets, knotting them together, and climbing down from a 4th floor window. Knowing that you're going to get caught and you're going to be, you know, you're going to be penalized. So it's happened not tying bed sheets together has happened before, but persons have escaped knowing good and well what the reaction is. But they're kind of, I just had to get out. I just had to get out and walk around and buy something and get a beer or something. I had to do something. It's hard for us to understand, isn't it? So if people can't tolerate such minimal disturbances, how do you think they're going to react when things become even more stringent for masses of people? How long are you going to be able to tell people, just be kind? There's been no program for character upliftment, for teaching mind and sense control. There's been no experience of higher pleasure. So you're going to see people's anger upscale much more than what you would expect. Anything else? Yes.
Thanks for class. Sometimes when I find a mistake in myself, I find I did something wrong. I'm afraid to admit that out of fear that the other person I admitted to will really get on my case. That they will point out, yeah, I knew you were wrong. And so out of trying to protect myself, and I want to admit that mistake, how can we do that?
The ideal bhakti life is that we're always ready to be corrected. And naturally, if someone cares for you who's making the correction, you'll more easily take it. We all know it's hard to take correction from someone who you feel doesn't care for you. That's why the better the relations amongst devotees, the easier it is to make corrections. So we're always striving to improve our relations with devotees. Sometimes we're mistreated, and sometimes we mistreat others. So yes, we're quick to apologize. And the more kind relationships there are amongst devotees, the more easy it is to accept correction. If you know someone cares about you, you'll listen, right? Navagori, you're such a wonderful devotee. We didn't have to burn the pizzas 3 weekends in a row. You'll listen, right? So we should all remember that. That's a very good question that we all can ponder. What was Mahaprabhu's perfect, out of this world example? Guru more murkha teki karilo sasan. My spiritual master told me I'm a fool and I should chant Hare Krishna. So I did. And now look what happened to me. So if you read that purport closely, you'll see the behavior of a real disciple. Never to consider yourself above being corrected. Lord Chaitanya presents himself as the role model. He didn't consider himself to be too advanced for being corrected. So that's the perfect standard that we're all aspiring for. I remember one devotee, one of my disciples, telling me she had a dream of Prabhupada chastising me. I was giving a class here in the Bhakti lounge, back when it was called Gaura Yoga. And when I was right in the middle of my class, Srila Prabhupada walks in. Everyone's astonished. And she relays, according to what she relays, Srila Prabhupada said to me, "Thank you. Thank you for coming with me." And I said, "No, Srila Prabhupada, thank you for picking me up." And he said, "You have become so big that you are correcting me?" It is her dream. So I replied, according to her dream, oh, I was, what could I say? I just shut up. And then according to her dream, Srila Prabhupada then smiled and said, "You always say whatever I say, but you do it in your own words." So, we should never consider ourselves beyond correction. Not that I've become such an older devotee, no one can correct me. Okay, last question. Yes.
You explained in a previous talk how surrender to Krishna means to give up your plan making factors, instead accept Krishna's plans. So throughout our life, we still have to make plans. For example, slip ashram, which ashram will have to do the ashram. So in these plans we make, how do we determine if they are our own plans or they're Krishna's plans?
How to make plans for your life. Always ask yourself the question, what's the best thing I can do for Krishna's service? Make that the centerpiece of whatever ashram you're in. And take guidance to accomplish that purpose. Keep your intelligence sharp by reading the books. Daily reading the books spiritualizes your intelligence. Consult your mentor. And that's why we have these classes. Hopefully someone listens. I've explained so many times, Bhakti is a guidance culture. Be patient as the society of devotees tries to adapt to a very vicious world. We're holding tight to core principles, but at the same time, we're flexible in what are not core principles. We're trying to deal with the contemporary context while holding on to the main inheritance through parampara. You may be able to see just over the years how things have evolved. I know in the case of the Brahmachari ashram, we started out with the classic Indian system of a Brahmachari ashram. No one should have everything. No one should have anything. Everyone should do like this, do like that. And then gradually we adapted to the Western realities. Even in India now, the Brahmachari ashrams, they have to adapt to the new India situation, in which very few young men are coming from a pristine, untarnished background, because the online pornography has slaughtered young men in India. So it's no longer that you can expect someone in India to put on saffron and go the distance. So that's why, although years ago we started out with the classic Brahmachari ashram, you join the ashram, you give up everything. Now, for the past few years, we have our yearly discussion. In other words, it's year to year, life in the Brahmachari ashram. It's not like automatic, put on saffron, that's it. We're going. You won't see any change going on for decades like this. No, every year you have to re-enlist. That's a change. Every year we ask the brahmacharis, are you sure you're in the right ashram? Do you really think you're going to be able to go on for? So doing it every year makes it so someone can opt out very easily without losing face, because you're only in the ashram year to year. Similarly, they're making changes like that in India. I know, when I go to India, I talk with the leaders there. They ask me, hey, it's becoming like the West here. What do you do in the West? They're asking me, India's becoming so different, we're not getting the same kind of young men like we did 20 years ago. The online pornography has just destroyed so many minds. And at the universities in India, there's no longer that old-fashioned strict division between men and women. No, it's parties and alcohol and all the things that have slaughtered minds in the West. So ashram leaders, they're asking me in India, how do we cope with this? So we shift. I often explain to our senior devotees that in terms of this outreach operation, there are no lines in stone. We're adapting without changing the core principles. But I know sometimes devotees, they have the misunderstanding that, well, the way it was 5 years ago, with some detail, that's the way it's always going to be. It's not like that at all. This place is a moving target. Hopefully moving in the direction of getting better and better. If you actually know how Prabhupada dealt with things during his stay with us, you would see it was an evolution. He knew how to adjust the sails as the boat moved along, while keeping the core principles. Just like back in the 70s or 80s, your child would be in a nursery from 9 to 3 during the day, a nursery run by a devotee mothers, and all the devotee mothers would send their children to a nursery and do service during the day. If you didn't do that, you were in Maya. But it's turned out that, especially in the Western world, parents are so irresponsible that unless they have their child with them, they quickly offload their responsibility. And also, care wasn't taken. No one understood anything about child abuse. What's that? Who want to abuse a child? Why should I have to be worried about that? So it's gone the other way now. Never let anyone have anything to do with your child. Prabhupada had a plan to establish gurukulas in the West. And then he actually said after a while, they'll never allow this. It's too radical for them. Put the gurukulas in India. So he adjusted. While keeping the same core principles. So we try to follow in those footsteps. So I often have to explain this to devotees when they present something like some detail or some custom that say, how long ago was that? Oh, 3 years. That's a long time. And we thank you for the feedback, but things have changed since then. I can see it in the householder ashram. I certainly see it in the brahmachari ashram. So many of our older brahmacharis take online courses because online education is big, and public speaking and logical analysis and Sanskrit pronunciation. Team building. You get anything online these days. So they're educating themselves. If you don't want a certificate, you can do the courses online for free most of the time. Just like I recommended something to you, right? So similarly, the brahmacharis do that these days. It's not like, Prabhu, you are a brahmachari. Can't read anything else. Can't have a laptop. No smartphone. It used to be like that back in the 90s. That's the classic Indian brahmachari ashram. It's not like that now. Maybe Ram Dass remembers the brahmachari ashram in the 90s. Now things are more. You take 1 year at a time. Let's see, at the end of the year, whether it's actually good for you to go on another year. No long-term status. Because sometimes People say to me, well, most of these men will marry, so shouldn't they, while they're in the brahmacharya ashram, be thinking about the future? I said, but guess what? They're only in the ashram for 1 year. Oh. And we'll see at the end of the year what the next year is going to be like. We take it 1 year at a time. Oh. Because there's some notion that you put on saffron and then that's it. You can't think about your future. It's just one way and that's it. Not like that at all. Hasn't been like that for years. So at the end of every year, we discuss with each brahmachari. Do you feel comfortably situated? Do you feel that you should be doing something else in your life? So that way we skip over the whole hurdle of, what about your future, Prabhu? We take 1 year at a time. So for someone to sacrifice 1 year is not a big deal, is it? Of course, there are some who want to go year after year after year, but still, every year they have to re-enlist. Is the army like that? You can re-enlist term after term? But how does it work? 3 months notice if you need to. But you could just keep on, right? Well, that's what I mean. How long is what do you sign up for? There's no specific term. It's just you have give 3 months notice. That's all.
They were giving 6 years and 15 years.
So you were saying they were giving a 6 year, 15-year, 20-year term, but because you always had that 3 month out option. Is that it? Well, we've got our 1 year out option. What they call in the U.S. Army, honorable discharge. Ladies like that, right? Yes? We're training them up just for you all. All right. We've had an interesting discussion. Let's have some kirtan. Hare Krishna.